Hello, everybody. This is Jeremy, aka Captain Subpar. You know me from the No Pink Spandex podcast, and I talked about a couple of months ago that I wanted to get into doing more single audio podcast sort of deal. Just giving my reviews, my thoughts on any random topic. And I've done that once. This is episode 2. And I decided to actually do a full-fledged review this time. Uh, as everybody out there knows, we've got a pandemic going on, so we're all spending a lot more time at home, and I've decided to use that time to catch up on some tokusatsu shows that I haven't watched over the years for whatever reason. And I ended up watching Kamen Rider Kuuga, all 49 episodes, in the span of about 2 to 3 weeks. For those who aren't in the know, the entire series is now available subtitled. Thanks to Shout Factory, you can watch it on their Shout Factory channel. You can watch it on TV through the Tubi app, which is what I used. Very simple. Just turn on your smart TV, search for the Tubi app, download it. You don't even have to log in if you don't want to. You can just type in Kamen Rider Kuuga, pop right up, and you can watch the whole thing. Before I get into any of the specifics of the series, I want to just give a little bit of background about my experience with Kamen Rider in general. I started watching Kamen Rider in the mid-2000s. Like many people, my first exposure to it was through the TV Nihon subs, which there are some polarizing opinions on those out there, which I definitely agree with to a certain extent. And so the first series I watched all the way through pretty much as it aired was Kabuto. And out of the Heisei era, the newer series, I watched everything after that on forward. And then I went back and I eventually checked out Blade and Hibiki and Faiz and Ryuki, all that sort of stuff. But I never got into the first two series of the Heisei era, Kuuga and Agito, which do have a slight connection from what I'm told. It's not major. It's not like you have to watch Kuuga before Agito, from what I've heard. But I just haven't really gotten into either of them. I tried to watch the first episode of Kuuga at the time, which would be, about a decade ago or so, and it just didn't click with me. I don't know why it didn't at the time, but I think we've all had those shows where we took 2 or 3 looks at them before we finally dove into the deep waters. So that's where I stand with this. I'm much more familiar with the more modern stuff, going back and watching some of the slightly older stuff, and it feels really weird saying stuff from like the year 2000 is old, but I mean, I was in high school then, so it really is in the eye of the beholder. And then on top of that, the other thing that I think is really important to mention is the way this series was subtitled. So, for a little bit of background information, the villains of this series have their own language. And so, for a good bulk of the series, they speak their own language, mostly just to each other, but them speaking to each other gives you some of the plot for the show. So as a viewer at the time, if you were just watching the regular subtitles, you don't really know what they're saying to one another. And I've seen a lot of fans who have already watched the show have had varying opinions on that. Some are like, oh, it adds more context, it makes the show more interesting. Others are like, well, if you give, it's not in the spirit of the show. They're saying like the whole point was to hide some of the information from you so it slowly gets revealed later, that the audience shouldn't be more in the know on that subject than the good guys. And I can see both sides of that. Personally, watching it the way I did, knowing what they were saying, I don't feel like it took away from the show. If anything, I feel like having it the other way around might have taken away from it, with me being a little more confused about what's going on. But at the same time, I also don't think too much of what the villains say ruins surprises for the show. And that's an important thing I want to note here. This should be obvious, but I do want to say it, is that my review here is going to be completely spoiled. Like, there's going to be tons of spoilers. I'm going to explain everything. I don't like to beat around the bush and try to talk around subjects because I don't feel like you can give a good full review. So, if you're very spoiler adverse, I would stop listening right now. But I don't know about you, but I've been able to watch shows that have had spoilers and still really enjoyed them. I think you enjoy them on a different level, but there's still a lot of enjoyment in them. Anyway, so I'm going to get to the show. A quick brief synopsis, because I do feel like a lot of people listening to this have watched Kuuga. But if not, so the basic concept is that in ancient times there were two tribes. The Linto, which are human beings nowadays, and then the Grongi, which are they have human appearances, but they also all have monster forms that are each individually based on a different animal. Okay, and the background seems to suggest that they actually were from the same tribe at one time, but it was kind of like an evolutionary step where they split off. So back in ancient times, Kuuga was an ancient warrior, and he sealed away all the Grongi. There's 200 of them in total. He sealed them all away, and at the same time he died, he was sealed away along with his belt, the first Kamen Rider belt of the new era, so to speak. And then in modern times, archaeologists dig this up. The main Grongi is let loose, and he resurrects all the other ones, and so it ends up becoming, a 1 or 2 episode battle each week with the next Grongi who is put into battle. And that's the way they work here is that it's kind of interesting because there isn't really like a set order of bad guys. It's not like, here's the main bad guy, here are the 3 or 4 henchmen that work for him, that sort of thing. It's more of a competition, and we see the competition level up, which I think is a really good idea because that also works with with Kuuga gaining more powers. That's always been one of the things that you've had to suspend belief with when it comes to Kamen Rider or Super Sentai or anything, and that's that so often the hero keeps getting more and more powerful, but as the villains are sent out, like they're not sent in any specific order, so it's like, oh boy, why is it that every monster of the week that they fight just happens to be more powerful? Like what would happen if they would send a monster that you would normally send in like episode 40 in episode 2? The Rangers or the Kamen Rider would get completely wiped out, right? So, but the way they do it with this, it's a competition, is that there are levels of the Grongi, and they have to complete ceremonies. And with each level, it gets a little more complex, the game that they play. Because there's somebody who, one of the Grongi is what she gives, like she says, okay, it's your turn to go kill a bunch of people. And then there's another guy with like a crazy medieval abacus, and he's counting up the people that are being killed. So in the first round, it's like, you have to kill this many number of humans in this amount of time. And then the next level, it's like, okay, you get to pick now how many you kill in a certain amount of time. And then the last round, it's like, you get to pick the number in the amount of time, and you have to come up with some sort of system for how you kill them. Like, I'm only killing this type of people that do this type of job, or that are in this type of vehicle, that sort of thing. Like they come up with these little clever ideas, to make the game harder for them. And it's like, if you complete one level, you'll advance to the next one, and you'll advance to the next one, and eventually you get to battle the main bad guy, the top Grongi, for leadership. That is at least the core concept. But of course, Kuuga beats all these guys before they have a chance to actually elevate themselves. Now, getting to Kuuga himself. Kuuga is Godai Yusuke, and I'm very interested in him because this is the era before the main rider was always, because I think people who've watched enough Kamen Rider know that the main rider, much like the Red Ranger and Super Sentai, tends to be like just like over the top spastic a lot of the time. Not always. There's examples that contradict that, like Tendo from Kabuto. but by and large, they tend to be, just like really energetic all the time. And while Yusuke is still a very idealistic person, like he gives people business cards that says he has 2,000 skills, and his number of skills basically coincides with whatever year it is. But he says he has all of these skills, and he's very idealistic. He had to help raise his sister because both of his parents have passed away. He's kind of like a world traveler, like a wanderer. And he works at a cafe, but realistically speaking, he's almost never there, not really doing a lot of work. He's just a wandering spirit. And he loves to give the old big thumbs up. That's the funny part is when I was watching the current Kamen Rider 01, where they have these little collectibles that are like cassette tapes, and they made them for all the past riders because that's kind of the thing nowadays is whatever the new collectible is, they make a variation of it for all the old riders, and it always has their skill on it, and then it said like Kamen Rider Kuuga thumbs upping, and I'm like, what the hell is thumbs upping? And then I watched this, and the thumbs up ends up becoming this really, really sweet thing that he does, and we actually get a backstory to it. We meet one of his teachers, and we understand why he's like this. And the teacher isn't even a one-off character. He shows up again a couple more times just to kind of just reaffirm, Yusuke's outlook on life. But anyway, so Yusuke ends up getting bonded with this belt. Like the belt actually merges into his body. And I think that's one of the coolest things about this show is that the powers aren't just for show. It's not just every week, hey, here's a fancy new power. Like, Yusuke gets hurt a lot. Like, he gets beat down sometimes. He loses his battles, and he ends up having to go to the hospital. They make a doctor one of the main characters because he's always checking him out and, well, not checking him out, checking him out and helping him along the way. And I think that's really interesting because, it just grounds the show on a certain level. And that's one of my biggest takeaways from Kuuga is that it feels so much more grounded than a lot of Kamen Rider series that I've watched. Modern Kamen Rider is just so much more lighthearted. And so I think this kind of gets down a well. And that's that a lot of fans of Kamen Rider and Super Sentai are people approximately my age, and there's this sort of cognitive dissonance where they're like, oh, this is a kid's show, but I really love it, and I gotta make sure people don't think it's a dumb kid's show. And that's why you see these older fans who are always like, I need Power Rangers to be dark and gritty, stuff like that, when I'm like, that's not the nature of the show. And more importantly, having, people be all bloody and get killed or whatever, any of that nonsense, does not improve a show. Like, your show is not automatically going to get better because people die, as opposed to like, oh no, they're having their courage stolen, or, they're just being threatened, that sort of stuff. Like, yes, it's nice to have stakes, but it's not the be-all to end-all. And more importantly, like what you like. That's what I always try to tell people. Like, it does not matter what type of television show you like to watch. If it's a show that, you feel embarrassed by because maybe it's a cartoon, maybe it's a dumb reality show, doesn't matter. Does it give you joy? Like Marie Kondo says, does it spark joy? Because if it sparks joy in you, then watch it. Who cares about that other sort of stuff? You're an adult. Like, you're allowed to like whatever it is that you like. But anyway, I digress. So that is part of the show, is that, like, legitimately these monsters every week are killing people. They're killing a lot of people, and you actually see them kill people quite frequently. Like, it's not like gore or anything, but I mean, you see them drop dead. You know that they're dead. You see them, you see like explosions, or you see like some, projectile enters them and then they fall down, that sort of thing. And even like about a third of the way through the series, they actually do a body count, and it's like 1,500 people already. So by the end of the series, I do feel like, there are thousands of people who were killed by the Grongi in this year. that Kuuga takes place. And I mean, it definitely adds stakes. It makes it real because you know that people can and will die. One of the side characters is the daughter of a character who's killed in the very first episode. And another one of the female characters, she has a lot of trouble dealing with the fact that her teacher was killed. She's trying to become an actress. She's the niece of the guy who owns the coffee shop that Yusuke works at. And she's got a crush on Yusuke, and that's cute and everything. But she still wants to be an actress. And her teacher dies, and it really messes with her for a while. She actually confronts Yusuke about, like, why are you so positive? You know, like, why are you so happy all the time? Like, stuff is happening. And one of the things that a lot of the characters don't always fully grasp is that Yusuke gets it. He's the one getting hurt every week. He's the one taking all these shots. He's the one dealing with the fact that people have died because he couldn't get to the scene of the fight quick enough. But he internalizes it. He's a very positive person, and he understands his role in this, and he knows that if he becomes a very dour person, then that's just going to penetrate everybody around him. So he maintains a positive attitude. He takes on this pain because he knows he has to. And I think that's one of the cool things about Yusuke is that he does have this cool, calm confidence about him, but it's not arrogance. He knows what he has to do, and he does it. Even later in the series, I mean, he taps into greater power because he knows that a bunch of kids died on his watch. One of the monsters in a two-parter, it's very reminiscent of The Ring, and like 80 kids, 80 young boys, I believe they said second-year students in high school, all are targeted, and they're all killed, and that sets him off. That makes him go crazy. So that's one of the thing is that it's the stakes. You can have these sort of stakes in a show without killing a bunch of people. It's all about how you sell it. And while this show does use it by actually killing them, it's not necessary, but it also adds to the realism of the show. You know, like I'm trying not to talk out of both sides of my mouth because we've all seen great series that we've loved, and it hasn't had high body counts. But anyway, digressing once again, getting back to the show. I think the other thing that I really love about this show that I want to mention is the characters. One of the more irritating things about some of the modern series is that oftentimes you'll have like the main writer, a secondary writer, maybe even a third one, and then there'll be like 2 or 3 human characters that, and not human, but 2 or 3 civilians, I'll say, and they're all kind of downgraded to like one characteristic. Like, I'm the sidekick who's a cop. I'm the sidekick who makes silly jokes, stuff like that. I'm the writer who likes mail. Like, what is that? I think that's his main trait. Like, they end up becoming these jokes almost. Like, they're only there to give a joke, and sometimes they're funny. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes they're hilarious, but it also feels like you can do more with them. And this show has a lot of characters. I'll try to run down a few of them. So obviously the second main character is Ichigo. Ichijo. He's a cop. And I'm not really big on the cop characters, but I really liked him. He's a serious guy. You learn that that's because of stuff that happened in his childhood. He tries to be a positive force, but he also takes on more than he probably should at times. And he's basically like Yusuke's right-hand man. Because Yusuke works a lot with the cops. He's in direct contact with them all the time. Throughout the series, he gets to even know more of them on a personal basis. But Ichigo is really the main go-between. He's the one that has Yusuke's back all the time. And I really appreciate that in a character because usually they end up giving that character a rider suit by the end because it's like, you gotta sell more merchandise. And Ichigo is just a strong character. Just a dude in a trench coat with a gun. That's all he needs. Then you have Sakurako, she went to college with Yusuke, and she's kind of like an archaeologist researcher. You know, she's the one that is trying to decipher all the ancient Grongi and Linto text and figure out like how does Kuuga work, how do you tap into more of his powers. She's always pulling all nighters, doing that sort of stuff. But she's like just his best friend, and with her is Jean. Jean is supposed to be a French guy who also works with Sakurako at the Institute. And you know he was kind of just like the stereotypical, you know, like let's put in a foreigner, let's put in a white guy for a little while, but then he slowly evolves as a character, and he ends up having this interesting relationship with one of with a scientist. I'm trying to remember which one she is. What's her name? But anyway, so there's this scientist. I'll get her name in a second when I this is one of the things that actually does infuriate me, is that it's very hard for me to remember all of these names one by one. But anyway, so there's this scientist lady who has a young daughter. Not a young daughter, a young son. Boy, I'm just doing just bad. Inokita, that's her name, Inokita, Hikari Inokita. So she's a biologist in the science division at the police department, and she's kind of a workaholic. She doesn't have a husband, but she has her mother and she has her son. And the underlying concept is that she is neglecting her son. And, you know, part of it is probably because she doesn't think she can be a good parent. Part of it is because she's helping them fight the Grongi. But she's definitely a very conflicted person in that sense. And what was really cool about her relationship with Jean is that they didn't force it into like an actual physical attraction. There might be something there. You know, they could end up becoming a couple, but it wasn't something they were pushing towards. What they were pushing towards was him helping her understand how to be a good mother. And I thought that was really fun. And I think that's one of the things that actually is very pervasive in this series, is that we actually see these people interact as human beings. Yusuke has his younger sister who works at a daycare center. Even she has her co-worker who is pregnant, who gives birth by the end of the series. There's 2 or 3 other cops that we know the names of, that we see all the time. Like just looking at the wiki article, it says allies 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 identifiable allies. Like that's insane. And like, while I can't always remember all of their names, if I see them, I can tell you a couple of really important parts of what they did in the series and how they related to Yusuke and what their purpose was in the show. And I think that's just one of the coolest things about this show. And so I was actually talking to my friends earlier today, and I was asking them, like, what are your favorite Kamen Rider series and what are your least favorite series? And could you give me like a brief explanation as to why? Because I have this running theory, and I do feel like it's kind of been pervasive as a result. And that's something I was sort of hinting at earlier, and that's that Kamen Rider has really gotten into a, like, really, it's really concentrating on the gimmicks. And the characterization is kind of going by the wayside in favor of the gimmicks. And it feels like the turning point for that was Kamen Rider Denno. Denno is a series that is so hardcore comedy focused. There are these 4 monsters that work with the main hero. They can take over his body and change his personality as a result. And there's just so much comedy in the series, and it ends up becoming episodic comedy where it's all 2-parters for the most part. And it's the main writer helping a random person traveling to the past to help them. And it's just joke after joke after joke. And the thing is, I love that style of comedy. I think it's great. Denno is one of the most successful Kamen Rider series of all time. which is both a positive and a negative. It's a positive because, again, it's a great show. I love it. I do agree with a lot of people saying that towards the end, it kind of went off the rails. Hey, it's a series with the train off the rails. Anyway, it kind of went off the rails in the sense that it didn't really have a main villain. And they were getting closer to the end of the series, and they're like, we kind of need a main villain. And when they threw one in, and it was very forced to try to give the series a quote-unquote proper finale. But despite that, it's still one of the most popular series of all time, and as a result, that kind of ended up becoming the tone for Kamen Rider in general. And again, there's a difference between being comedy-heavy and being like, just silly and slapsticky for kids. Because even Kuuga that I'm talking about now has tons of funny moments. It's hilarious at times, but the comedy is never one of the main focuses. And that's the difference here, is that with, Denno on forward, a lot of the series, the comedy is a very, very big element, some more than others. Shows like Forze has tons and tons of comedy. Well, as opposed to shows like, let's say, Build, or even, it's there, but it's not like as all around pervasive. Like everybody has their silly comedy quirky traits, but it doesn't like rule the roost, so to speak. And so for me, it's very tough because I watch Kuuga and I do wonder to myself how much of my love is for the show itself and how much of it is just seeing a break from the modern, like, in-your-face, gimmicky comedy series. Because this one, by comparison, is pretty light. The main Kuuga has his regular red form. He even has a de-evolved white form. And then he has 3 power-up forms, a blue, a green, and a purple. Later in this series, he finds ways to augment them all to give them like super forms, but they're still basically the same form with just a little extra gold trim. And then he gets a powered-up black form, which even powers up further into an ultimate form, but even those only appear in the last couple episodes. They're not focuses of the show in the slightest, so he really is a guy that just has 4 extra forms. He's not putting in a new little cassette tape or bottle or switch or whatever every single week. Doesn't need to do that. Doesn't need to constantly do form changes. And as a result, we have more time for the characters. And if I have any major complaint about the series as a whole, I would say it comes down to the villains. Because the villains are fun. But none of them have true staying power, so to speak. So there's the humans give them numbers as they meet them, and they just call them unidentified life forms. So the main villain at the very end that Yusuke fights to, in the finale, is 0. And then there's 1, which is a woman with a white rose on her forehead. And she's the one that I said, tells everybody, hey, it's your turn to go, it's your turn to go. There's the guy with the abacus who's counting. And then there is a bat who was the first one to encounter Yusuke, one of the first ones, and he failed in his, attempt to kill enough people in enough days. And as a result, he became a servant for number 1. I believe he's number 3. But as a result of that, those 3 or 4 characters are the only villains that have constant staying power that reoccur quite frequently. Everybody else, like, it's just like, oh, here's 3 or 4 of them that are in a group for a while, and then they all take their shots at Kuuga and fail. And then 3 or 4 more of them gather, and they all gather around 1. And that just kind of ends up being the cycle for the show. And they end up telling us that 0 kills like 3/4 of the entirety of the Grongi population because he decides they're weak. But even that happens again near the end of the series, and we never see much of it on screen. That's one of the things about this show that is interesting is that time, they don't make us see everything. There are times where like an episode will start and be like, oh, last episode you killed number 22, and this episode you're on number 24. What happened to 23? You beat him off screen. Or it'll start and be like, oh, the current one you're fighting has been on a killing spree for the last week, and we just didn't see it. We're just seeing the end of it. They're not like forcing us to go through each one individually because they're realistically saying that, sometimes they'll attack, consistently for a few days in a row, and sometimes they'll disappear off the grid for a week or so. You just don't know. Like, it's not like an every week occurrence. So they try to make it flow more of a real time, which I really appreciate, adding to the realism. But what that also lends to is the fact that, like I said, there isn't really a main villain arc to follow. You're just watching them, like one of my friends said, as a force of nature is really what they are. And that's good and bad. And that kind of brings me to the way the show ended, which I found really, really fascinating. Is that so there's 49 episodes, and in 48, we get to this big build-up where we find out that after Yusuke beat the last like regular monster of the week, quote unquote, bad guy, that he was in a fight with Zero and he lost. And we only get it through sort of flashes. We see that a bunch of people were killed. He got absolutely wrecked. His belt was messed up. And he's kind of just in a healing process, getting ready for this final battle, realizing that he has to find a way to achieve more power. So it's a way they play with time. And he finally gets to this last battle, and it really isn't that long. He achieves his final form, and it's really like 3 or 4 big punches, and that's it. And then the final episode, there is no Kamen Rider action whatsoever. The final battle's already happened. It's really a just an addendum, an epilogue to the whole series. And even Yusuke himself only appears in flashes for most of the episode. The episode is really everybody in his life being like, it's over, we did it, thank you, Yusuke, we all can move on with our lives, that sort of thing. They're just grateful, and there's a sense of peace. He only even says a couple lines to some kids at the end of the episode, and that's it. It's just a really nice, tranquil ending to the series that I didn't really see coming. I think that's one of the funnest parts about it, is because you get to episode 48 and you're like, okay, we're going to have this great long battle. It's probably going to bleed into the last episode, and then we're going to have a nice little capper at the end. But they're like, no, the battle wasn't really the point. Like, yes, that's the end goal, to beat every single Grungy, but it's the thing that brought you to the show in the first place, and at least the thing that should have kept you around, was the characters. It was the scientist, it was the detective, it was the researchers, it was the head of chief of police. All these characters that work with Yusuke on different levels to beat the bad guy. Like, the thing that gave me more satisfaction than seeing him win that final battle was seeing all those different characters come together at a big table with these giant scripts that they've all helped compile of information that they've all gathered to help Yusuke figure out how to win this battle, how to win the day. Like, that is the victory, is these characters coming together. And that's the thing that I truly think modern Kamen Rider is missing. It's missing side characters that you care about. Characters that might not drive the overall narrative in a battle aspect, in a selling toys aspect, but who really are the lifeblood of the show. I mean, because you can give me all the flashy stuff in the world that you want, but if you don't give me any of that extra stuff, any of that characters that relate to them, then it's hard for me to invest as a fan. So, bravo to Kuuga for doing that. People have told me that Agito is just as good, if not better. That is the last of these Heisei era series that I have to watch now. Hopefully, Shout Factory will be subtitling it soon. If not, I'll get to it eventually. But I really want to tackle it soon. And also for those out there who do like Kuuga, and are watching who end up watching it on like the Tubi app or Shout Factory, they also have the very first Kamen Rider out there that I want to watch as well. The very first one from like the late 60s or 70s or so. And that seems like it'll be really fun and interesting. So I'm going to get on that soon and hopefully give you a review of that. And I do want to answer the question that I posed to my friends, and that's, what is your favorite Kamen Rider series of all time? I've thought about this. I've even vacillated on my answer a couple of times over the years. But the answer I usually go back to that I stick with is Kamen Rider Kiva. Kiva is a show that, first of all, I love the aesthetic. It has this sort of gothic look to it, kind of like a Dracula, Castlevania vibe to the suits. I like the fact that the main rider is kind of a frail weakling, but he perseveres, and he doesn't spend too much time whining about the fact that he's a bit of a weakling. I like the fact that we're telling the story of both him in, I believe it's 2009, and then his father in the 1980s, I think 85, I want to say. His father, Otoya, who to this day is still my favorite character in Kamen Rider history. And it's a really nice juxtaposition because you've got the son who's like, oh, I'm frail, and then you've got the dad who's like, hey, I'm a playboy. I love the ladies. And we're constantly going back and forth between the two eras. And by the end of the series, they have to come together because we have to know who the mother is and we have to know how the father died. So it's kind of a mystery in that sense. It's not a perfect series, definitely. I think that some of the side characters, specifically the three monster characters, the Frankenstein, the wolf, the creature from the Blue Lagoon, who give him some of his powers, I think that they had more story to give and they weren't allowed to. I think that the secondary writer, Ixa, I think he could have probably had a bit more material. I think his character shifts a little too much personality-wise that isn't fully earned. But I also think that the finale is one of the most satisfying ones I've ever seen, and I think that's all I want to say about that one, because Kiva is a series I really do feel like people need to experience firsthand. But yeah, it's to me, it's the perfect balance of, yes, we have to do power-ups, but we're going to give you character, we're going to give you action, we're going to give you humor, all that sort of stuff. It's the best overall mix of all of those to me. And that being said, while I do think that a lot of the modern Kamen Rider has failed us, the last three series, Build, Geo, and now 01, specifically Build and 01, because Geo's okay, but specifically those two series have been fantastic. I love both of those series. There was stuff before that was definitely a letdown, like Ghost and Drive, very, very much underperformed. Two of my least favorite series of all time. But Kamen Rider does feel like it has been trending in the right direction. Is it where I want it to be? Not entirely. But it's trending upwards, and that's what I appreciate. I do feel like we're getting more to a balance between the old school seriousness and the new school wackiness. We're finding something closer to the middle of that, and that's what I appreciate. Anyway, Kamen Rider Kuuga overall, I just want to say that, if I'm grading on a scale of 1 to 10, I give it an 8. Not perfect, but I think if you're willing to stick around and invest in the characters and watch their overall relationships grow, then you're going to have a great time. Like I said, the biggest detraction is that the villains are a force of nature as opposed to being individualized characters. And for some people, that doesn't necessarily matter, because I know everybody loves Gokaiger from Super Sentai, and those villains kind of suck. So your mileage may vary. That's always my tagline at the end, is because everybody's different. The thing I found most fascinating when I asked all my friends about their favorite series and their least favorite series is that almost every series ranked as either best or worst. A lot of them ranked both. I think the series that got the most likes was Ryuki, which isn't really a favorite of mine. I like it, but I wouldn't put it near the top. So it just goes to show that the opinions for Kamen Rider vary wildly. I think they vary more than opinions for Power Rangers series. In all honesty, so there's a lot to like out there. I think for a lot of people, the best way to pick a Kamen Rider series is to say, what do you want the most focus on? The characters, the story, the comedy, and what type of motif do you like? Do you like vehicles? Do you like animals? Do you like magic? Any of that sort of stuff. And there's probably a series for you as a nice entry point into the franchise as a whole. Oh, and that's another thing I should say is the other question was, what's your least favorite? For me, it's Drive. Drive was a decent concept. I liked the main rider well enough, but it just ended up going into massive cliche territory with the villains. With here's the villain who's the broody loner, and he becomes the rider who, oh, sometimes I'm with you, sometimes I'm not. I don't know what's going on. Oh, my head hurts. Oh, so many memories. That sort of crap. And cars in general are just never a big thing for me. Like Go Onger or Car Ranger. Although I did like Car Ranger, but that's despite the theme. But just when you're really heavily focused on the vehicle aspect, that kind of turns me off. Hey, turn off, turn on. Hey, jokes again. Bad puns. But yeah, so that would be where I would lie. Kiva's my favorite. Drive is my least favorite. Kamen Rider as a whole is trending in the right direction. Kuuga's an 8 out of 10. That's me recapping everything I've said, which probably means that I am done with this episode, guys. As far as I go, please, please, please follow me on social media. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me most of the time on Instagram. All of them are Captain_Subpar. If you're at this channel already, you know where I am at on YouTube. Please subscribe. I know it's a cliche thing to say, but subscribing and liking and commenting and all that good sort of stuff, I really appreciate it and it helps me. And please, if you haven't, just go scroll down to the comments and tell me what your favorite Kamen Rider series is. Tell me what your least favorite series is. And most importantly, tell me why for both of those. I would love to know what your line of thinking is. I'd love to get more results and see if there's any sort of general consensus about any individual show. Now, as far as I go with this podcast and with more videos on YouTube, they've definitely been few and far between because of the pandemic. I do want to get some more toy reviews out. It's very difficult, though, because the area where I normally do my reviews is currently my workstation because I'm working from home. And I do definitely have another audio podcast planned. I have a topic in mind, and hopefully I'll get to that within the next week or so as opposed to the next few months. And that's all I really have for you guys. I don't really even know if I should do my sign-off about King of the Geeks. It's whatever. It's milquetoast. But yeah, thank you for listening, guys. Please catch me on No Pink Spandex. We're releasing tons of episodes right now because Beast Morphers is airing and because the comic books are back up and running despite the pandemic. So there's always more of that out there of me. There's always more of my co-hosts, Lisa, Spy, Brandon. All the good people are going to be there. So I will see you then, and thank you for listening.